Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to go over my first impressions of Holy Paladin after doing some Mythic Plus testing on the Dragonflight beta. I actually got to try out some pretty tough keys with a few different builds, so I'm actually feeling reasonably confident on the class so far. Before I talk about exactly how the class is performing though, I want to go over some of the newer changes to the playstyle. To many Paladins' dismay, I feel like they got some of the least new things to work with out of all the healers in Dragonflight. A lot of people are real bummed by this, but personally I don't think it's that big of a deal. I really love Shadowlands HPal. I thought it was really fun to play, and I'm happy that the playstyle is continuing rather than getting some big shakeup or going in a different direction while fitting in, maybe some awkward or weird spells in the rotation. That being said, most of the new talents on the Holy Spec tree revolve around your casted heals, like buffs to Infusion, Flash of Light, or Holy Light. The big question is, how good is caster HPal gonna be? In Mythic Plus, I think it's not gonna be something that you run, at least in higher keys. All of Paladin's damage comes from being in melee, so playing at range isn't gonna be viable really. If you're just casually doing lower keys, let's say you're just healing with buds or just, working on your healing playstyle and you don't really know the dungeons, I think playing at range will be just fine if you want to. I know there's a lot of healers out there that don't care as much about damage to begin with, so it can be a viable alternative for most people to play with. Although I didn't take many of the caster talents in my melee build, I did take Bestow Faith and Divine Favor. Bestow Faith doesn't compete with any powerful talents anymore, so it's simply just an easy 1 point to help your holy power and ranged healing. Divine Favor is actually a pretty nice option to use every 45 seconds. It gives you a powerful and quick Holy Light in cases of emergency. I think anyone who plays Paladin knows the feeling where you spend all your holy power and then your holy shock trying to heal somebody, only for them to take even more damage. And Divine Favor is a nice way to sneak in a big casted heal when you don't have holy power without losing your rhythm. Blessing of Summer is making a return too, or honestly I should just say it's making a debut since nobody played it in Shadowlands. I think the ability is cool, but I know a lot of WoW players aren't a big fan of external buffs. In the bottom of the tree, you'll be able to also take some neat combinations of stuff that you couldn't previously. Some examples that I've been trying are Avenging Crusader alongside Awakening, since keeping the uptime of melee wings was one of the big reasons it wasn't used that much. You can also take Glimmer with Beacon of Faith, and then alongside Divine Toll has really good AoE healing, even if your team isn't grouped up that much. I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't experiment at all with the caster talents like Barrier of Faith or Tears Deliverance. They just didn't seem super fun to me, but feel free to give them a try, they might actually be pretty good. In the class tree, we have another couple cool new additions. Like many other healers, we can now talent into an Interrupt. It's going to cost us 4 points, so you may not take it in every scenario, but it isn't too bad to get compared to some of the other classes that have to spend 6 or 7 points. Blessing of Sacrifice is massively buffed now. There is a talent called Sacrifice of the Just. It reduces the cooldown of Blessing of Sac by 60 seconds. Having it on a 60-second cooldown is just extremely helpful for your tank. And honestly, with how tanky tanks are right now, you can honestly keep your beacons on other members of the party a lot of the time, and then just throw that Blessing of Sac on your tank when you think he's in trouble, which you can do basically every single pull. The only other notable thing on the class tree I want to talk about is Of Dusk and Dawn. This gives you a 6% healing and damage buff whenever you hit 5 holy power. It's good, but honestly pretty annoying to play around. I'd rather use my holy power what I want to use it on, if my team needs healing, or if I want to save it, or if I want to do damage. I don't want to just wait until I hit 5 holy power before I can use it, and sometimes you can kind of get caught being greedy, letting your team die even though you have 4 because you're trying to get that 5th one. That being said, the buff isn't super powerful, it's only 6% like I said, so if you're messing it up often or you just don't care about it, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it's probably a talent that you'll be taking. I don't think it's going to be game-breaking to most people's enjoyment, unless you're really trying to min-max raid healing, for example. So now let's go over a little bit of how the class was performing in keys. Right now, a trend on the beta is definitely tons of melee DPS. I'm seeing 2 or 3 melee DPS in almost every single group. I don't know if this is going to stay for release, but Holy Paladin loves stacked melee DPS. This allows you to put a beacon on a single ranged if it's there, and then just crank huge healing. You get your full mastery bonus. Any Light of Dawn procs you get is hitting everybody on your team. Although some healers were struggling with some of the really big healing checks in the beta, I noticed that when your team is stacked, HPALs are clearing 50, 60k HPS sustained for pretty long fights, and not having much problems at all with healing since they can do that somewhat outside of cooldowns. This can be a good thing, but also is probably annoying in a pug world since that's not something you can always rely on. As for its damage, it's passable. It's not an outlier like in early Shadowlands when it was blasting away every healer. However, you can still contribute pretty meaningfully. You do have to talent a certain way though to get that damage. For example, there are talents that buff your Consecrate alongside other talents that give you stat buffs, maybe just a flat haste buff, or certain spells that give you intellect when you plus Crusader Strike. This means you'll end up doing a large percent of your damage with Consecrate, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that if you're not in melee with all these buffs and all these talents, your damage is gonna fall off very, very quickly. Paladin's utility is top tier, just like it's been for nearly every expansion. Honestly, it's gotten even better. The 1 minute cooldown Blessing of Sac and having an interrupt are incredibly powerful. You're always going to be happy having a Paladin in your group, well, so long as they're keeping you alive and using their buttons. I would say, however, that it's definitely one of the more difficult classes in the game right now. Maybe not quite as difficult as Disc Priest, but it's up there. Especially early on in an expansion when you don't necessarily know all the mob mechanics, it can be really easy to sort of tunnel vision and die in melee, or be forced out of melee because you don't know what's going on and lose some healing. On top of that, you probably aren't getting the full benefit of all your utility, like knowing what you can use Blessing of Protection on or Blessing of Freedom, but don't let this all scare you away. Eventually you're going to learn, and it's a really, really fun class that brings a lot to the team. The last thing I wanted to mention is the tier set. The HPAL tier set for the first season of Dragonflight is okay, but like all the other ones, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a flat crit buff whenever you use Holy Shock, which will, be all the time. You basically have 100% uptime, and then your other spells have a chance to buff the next Holy Shock than when they get used. This tier set isn't as powerful for healing, since the Light of Dawn is going to be the best way to buff your Holy Shock because it's always hitting a bunch of targets. However, you're not pressing Light of Dawn as much in Mythic Plus. That being said, the trade-off that makes it a little better in Mythic Plus is that it does contribute to your damage, since it is just a flat crit buff. Many of the other healer tier set bonuses add absolutely zero damage, and since Paladin's healing is already pretty good anyway, it's honestly probably a good trade in this season. So overall, even though Paladin isn't getting a whole ton of new toys in Dragonflight, I'm still pretty excited to play it. The melee Paladin playstyle to me is really, really fun, and there will be enough new things that it won't feel like just another expansion of the same spells. I really do hope, though, in future patches, whatever power they release, such as new tier sets or whatever, will shake up the playstyle just a little bit. And yeah, that's it for my first impressions on HPAL. If you made it this far in the video, I'd really appreciate a like on the vid as well as a sub to my channel. It helps me grow, and I'd love to be at 100k subs before the end of the year. Thanks for watching, friends, and happy keying.